Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sire here today to give you some more about our US civil rights topic that we're exploring this term. And we've officially made it. We're into the 1960s, which for many historians is the defining decade where all the protests and all the campaigning really came and built the most progress for the African Americans in getting those civil rights that they've been long fighting for many decades. If you haven't already, do make sure you've checked out our previous videos in this series to build yourself into the contextual knowledge to reach us now into the 1960s. A lot has come before this, and as we go into this defining decade, it really will help you in you understand where the African Americans have come from and the struggles they've been conducting, not just here in the 50s quite recently, but many decades before, and how it's going to culminate into this decade that we're entering now. Do remember as well, these are videos catered towards the student level, so our content and key knowledge is provided with some historical skills along the way. So, notepads and pens are ready, and let us begin. So in this video, what we're going to explore is the actual civil rights movement itself. I've been hinting about it in quite a few videos now, mentioning key figures throughout. But this is the decade where they really come to the fore and really are a united force. So it's important to understand very clearly, as I make reference to these groups, who they are, who their leaders are, and quite precisely what their aims are and how they go about achieving their success in this decade. So, what exactly is the civil rights movement? Well, it's been this wide force, this big coalition of civil rights activists that have been gradually coming together throughout all the decades as things have changed and moved on. The civil rights movement by 1960 is made up of four key groups. The first one is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was created in 1957, and this contains perhaps the most famous leader of the movement, which is Martin Luther King Jr. You should remember we mentioned him before. He became quite famous after the Montgomery bus boycott in 1956. Another group that really becomes quite popular is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, as it tends to be abbreviated as SNCC. This is led by the chairman John Lewis, and like it says, this is a student committee. It's made up of African American college students in particular, and they built themselves into a significant force by the early 1960s, and they're going to play a key role as the decade rolls around in representing the younger force, the next generation of African Americans who really want to lead and change the civil rights position that they face and all the segregation, all the Jim Crow laws that they're suffering with. The third one is a group we've encountered quite a few times now throughout the decade, which is the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. This one has a fair few leaders, particularly Roy Wilkins as the main leader, but for our lessons, the person we're most familiar with is Thurgood Marshall, conducting litigation, trying to get laws passed, and having a key role to play in big advancements in civil rights legislation, like Morgan v. Virginia, like Bowder v. Gale, like the overturning of Plessy v. Ferguson. All these cases we've come across, Marshall had a key role to play in those, so the NAACP should be remembered for that. And the final one is the Congress of Racial Equality, which is led by James Farmer. And so all these groups, what exactly is their connection? Well, of course, they all want to improve the civil rights position for African Americans, especially now as we enter the 1960s, but they all have some similarities that help connect them together. For instance, all of them prioritize grassroots direct action. What exactly is that when I say grassroots and direct action? Well, a quick reminder, direct action is this idea of protest, but peaceful protest, where they've simply challenged the laws of segregation. They challenge things like Plessy v. Ferguson, and especially try and see if the federal government will get involved and help ensure that, yes, there's change in law de jure, but that there will be de facto real change that the African Americans can actually feel and find present in their lives. Like we saw with the Montgomery bus boycott, for example, by thousands of African Americans refusing to sit in the so called whites only areas on buses, they were able to prove that actually the federal government was not upholding their laws, was not upholding, and therefore was not doing their job to ensure racial segregation was not occurring. Actually, they should be working to make sure things are desegregated. And again, the reason they want it to be grassroots, what does this mean? Well, grassroots means that it's the people, the wider movement. It's not just one or two people making a speech or the leaders doing actions, but it's African Americans around their communities. They're all coming together in direct mass protest against certain laws to prove it, to make a stand and make change together. Make use of the fact that, as we said, there's millions of African Americans throughout America. And if they all came and made a stand, maybe together they can make some change and get closer to equality with their civil rights. A second key tenet is the influence of religion, particularly Baptist ministers. We see with the likes of Martin Luther King Jr. in particular, that he, of course, had this key Baptist upbringing, and they're going to use this upbringing as well, channel their beliefs through speeches. Baptist churches are a key part of not just Martin Luther King, but other groups as well. For instance, Nick, for instance, are using Baptist churches to meet up with local groups and African Americans and teach them how to register to vote, how to be more aware of voting in particular. They also use songs. Music is a very important thing for the African American community. One song that becomes quite popular in the movement is Eyes on the Prize, for example. And actually, it's the name of a documentary series that also spawns from this as well. And so music is a real key part for them. It goes back to the slavery era when music was a scene of relief and helps them get in touch with their culture. And through that music, it unites them. And of course, that music is connected to their religion. And so religion then is a key part of their group as well. But they also rely on the media. This is the third thing that they want to channel and control to gather change. What do we mean by this? Well, the media is going to present these groups in a certain way. And so the idea of direct action is they want to look civil, they want to look respectful, and they want to look as though they are moderate people. They want to defy the Jim Crow stereotype that they're fools or they're idiots or they're violent or themselves. They're also racist against whites. They actually want to present themselves as a united movement who is kind, caring, and therefore deserving of equality with white people. You probably notice on the image I put on the screen that represents the majority of these civil rights groups coming together is that the men especially tend to wear uniforms and suits. So this idea they want to look presentable, they want to look smart, and of course when they're attacked by white racists, and this is captured on film, on camera, and shown to the wider community and the world, they clearly look as though they're the victims of white racism, and therefore they can get white moderates on their side, and therefore convince people to support them because they are respectable people, and therefore should not be abused in such a horrid way. And the fourth key part of their campaigning is they want to focus on the southern states. We saw this now as a theme that's come across throughout our civil rights lessons, which is the southern states especially are the most racist and the most anti-African American. They're the ones who are committing the attacks. They're the ones doing the lynchings. Again, all we got to do is look at the case of Emmett Till. They're even attacking and killing African American children. And that's what we really need to bear in mind here, is where this campaign is focused on and the change they want to enact. Now, this all doesn't happen straight away, of course. This is the plan. This is the template they want to master and adapt. And it really is coming together. And we're going to see in the 1960s how a few tries and a few attempts, they eventually perfect this model, especially under Martin Luther King Jr. Really form a true coalition here, a true civil rights movement that will not only protest for change, but get change actually to occur in America. I also want to briefly mention Philip Randolph as well. You may remember him as the leader of the Brothers of Sleeping Car Porters. He actually is still around in the movement as well, and he's still doing some key actions. We're going to see he's actually in the image as well. And we're going to see he plays a key role when we get up to something called the March on Washington in 1963. So do bear that in mind. Although I've called these the big four groups that lead the movement and represent it in the media and therefore in popular memory the most, there are other African Americans still committing actions as well. There are also some other groups, particularly Nation of Islam and Malcolm X, that we're going to get onto in future videos, that also should be worth noting as well, but for different reasons. Their methods are different to what these big four groups are trying to achieve. I also want to briefly outline Martin Luther King Jr., because we're going to see, particularly for this civil rights movement in the early 1960s, he is, for many, the key figure, the definitive leader of the movement and a uniting symbol. And this isn't without controversy. We're going to see in future lessons how actually there's going to be some tension in who should be the leader of the movement. But for all intents and purposes, many historians would agree that he is the definitive figure. If you could point to any individual leader of the movement, it would probably be MLK. Why is this the case? Well, we're actually going to learn more about Martin Luther King in his own separate video series towards the end of this entire civil rights module when we get to it. You want to know some key things that we should bear in mind whenever I bring up Martin Luther King as this series goes on. For instance, he actually came to national attention during the Montgomery bus boycott. You may remember I said with Rosa Parks, who was leading that movement. It was Martin Luther King. He was chosen as a young Baptist minister of just 26 years old to lead that movement, to get himself on television, to do his preaching, to do his speeches. And so he really came to the fore through that. But Martin Luther King wanted to carry that on, so hence he formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, in 1957 to keep up the campaigning. A brief background about him as well. He has a deep faith. He's from a Baptist church growing up in Georgia. And again, that's a southern state. So he had a youthful upbringing with lots of racism and suffering under the Jim Crow laws in his childhood. One of his key talents as well is his oratory skill. He's a talented speaker, and we're going to see with something called the Eye of a Dream speech. And that's actually an exemplary point that is not just considered a key moment of the civil rights movement, but a key moment in all of history for what exactly he achieved in that moment and why he's still remembered today, if only for that one thing in popular culture. He's also going to be a significant part of two other major campaigns we're going to see, Birmingham and Selma. And he has a sadly tragic end in 1968 when he is assassinated by a white racist when he's actually trying to combat economic inequality through something called the Poor People's Campaign. So there's just a bit of brief background, and these are just bullet points, of course. Everything I've mentioned here, we're going to get into much more detail about in our future videos, and especially about Martin Luther King Jr. And again, I want you to really think in the following few videos we do, is it right to say Martin Luther King Jr. is something of a definitive leader for the civil rights movement? That, of course, find out in future videos as we now go into the wider civil rights movement and its actions in the 1960s. As always, I hope you found this video quite insightful, and I really do hope you now have a good background of who the civil rights groups are and a bit about the leaders, and especially Martin Luther King here, what we can use and bring forward in our future videos. Make sure you've subscribed as well, and make sure you're commenting below what you're learning and what you're finding most fascinating about this series and module as we go through it. This has been History with Sire. Thank you for listening.